Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I'm naturopathic Dr. Fiona Chin, co-founder of the Kidney Disease Solution, and Genesis, our supplements that go with the program. And I'm joined again today by the amazing Jessianna Saville. She is the principal and head lead renal dietitian at Kidney Nutritional Institute. Probably the best bunch of renal dietitians I've ever come across. Jessianna is an expert in all things renal and dietitian, and she joins me again today, and we're going to start diving into the topic of transplant. So, Jessianna, thank you for joining me and sharing your knowledge on this really great topic, because it's not one we've covered, and it's one that I think we definitely need to talk more about. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really important topic, because if you are preparing for transplants, you really want to know, like, what do I have to do? How long is it going to be? Like what to expect. You want to know what to do before and if you get a transplant, you definitely want to know what to expect afterwards, so you can keep that transplant as strong as possible. And no surprise, nutrition is a massively, I cannot state enough, important topic on both sides, whether it's like staying at a low GFR till you get to transplant, how you prep for transplants, so you have the best outcomes. And also there's some really big nutritional considerations afterwards to keep your transplant strong. It's hard to get a transplant, so you really want to take really great care of it.
Yeah, well, that's right. You want to look after that baby when it goes in. I know not lots of people don't think like this, but I think some people think I'll get a transplant and I'll be cured. And I know for PKD, that's definitely the case, because obviously the new kidney doesn't have the genetic mutation in it that makes you prone to that. But other people just going through a transplant because they've had kidney failure, whether it's due to high blood pressure or diabetes, as we would say naturopathically, the driver of the disease potentially is still there. Or if, I've got a couple of patients with lupus that have had maybe 2 transplants, and we want to make sure that we're looking after the new kidney and all of those sort of things. So walk us through the journey, because it is quite a journey, starting with all the prep and leading up, and even how you get on the transplant list, how that all happens, because maybe people don't even know that.
Sure. And I want to show you, I have a really great visual here. Before we even get to that, Fiona, I want to talk just a little bit about how the transplant conversation comes up.
Done. That sounds great.
I think that's really, really important starting point before we talk about, okay, now I'm getting transplant, what do I do?
Yeah.
So for a lot of the best possible care is that when your GFR is either on a trajectory where it is declining quickly, or your GFR is already at a low point. In the United States, usually GFR less than 15 is where these conversations come up. Yep. Sometimes really, really aggressive, proactive physicians at a GFR of 25 or 20, when you're really seeing a decline, they will start the transplant conversation. And ultimately that transplant conversation is like, hey, what is your projected timeline here? Mm-hmm. B, what symptoms are you having because of CKD, and how is it really impacting your life? So if your GFR is 25, but you're having tons of swelling, you're having, lots of fatigue, like you're just really not feeling well, it's, more likely, unless you get into some, dig into the nutrition a little bit, that you're probably going to decline. So, the conversation is, are you going to need a transplant? If so, what transplant centers would you recommend? And what is that going to look like? Those are some conversations that come up. It is about at this point that we have a lot of patients that will reach out to us.
Okay.
Their GFR is 25, 20, less than 20, 15, 10, 9. I've had a patient whose GFR was as low as 3, right?
Wow.
And they're like, hey, I know that transplant is probably in my future. There is the reality that for some patients, not every patient, but for some patients, if they've had a long, slow decline of kidney disease, they probably are not going to regain enough function to sustain their kidney function for their whole life. Maybe. There are some situations where we see that, but there are some situations where you expect, in X amount of years, I may need a transplant. A lot of those patients are like, hey, I just want to hold my function as long as possible, so I don't have to start dialysis. I can go straight into transplant when a kidney becomes available. Mm-hmm. And that's where we talk about really aggressive nutrition therapies, because it has been shown for sure to help at that later stage. And we've had patients whose GFR Actually, we have a patient, she's been with us for 3 or 4 years, and she had an access placed, right? Of actually still has the access there because they were expecting her to start dialysis, but she didn't want to go there. She wanted to, go to transplant instead. So she's been doing aggressive nutrition therapy, modified her diet, has made a great lifestyle out of it. And 3 or 4 years later, she has still not started dialysis.
Right.
And, more or less feels great. She's on the waiting list for a transplant. And so at some point, hopefully that's where she'll be able to go. So I just wanted to clear that up, because if you're late stage and transplants in your future, there is kind of this can be a dicey game sometimes. There's like, should I start dialysis? Or can I wait long enough till I get to transplant? What can I do to kind of bridge that waiting period? So first thing that I just want to clear up, because I think that's really, really, really a critical part.
No, thank you. I agree. Thank you for clearing that up. It's really important. People
Yeah.
hear about the questions. Yeah.
And I mean, there's tons of things, right? There's supplements just to give a shout out to your guys' stuff, your products, is that it works good, right? We use it for late stage folks all the time. These low protein diets with keto analogs, they work really, really good. You just want to be mindful, because some people will go low protein, very low protein diets to preserve their kidney function. There's a little bit of dogma on the internet about that, and they will malnourish themselves, which is probably the worst thing you can do leading into a transplant.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because you have to have some nutrient stores for that healing process. And it's such a critical thing. So I really think if you're trying to maintain kidney function to get to transplant, which we see all the time, we have a lot of patients that get transplants and never touch the dialysis chair, that you get a good professional on your team.
Totally agree.
Because it really makes a good difference. And I think the other thing that's really critical is that you and your doctor have a really solid conversation about your goals and what are the safety parameters. It's so important. I have a patient now, and he's held his kidney function for a long time. His GFR is around 6, a little bit under 6. But he saw that he was trending down, and he became very proactive about getting a transplant. And he's doing a swap program. So his donor just donated in August, and now he's waiting, right? He's waiting until he can get that transplant. And, we meet every month and we talk about it, where your lab's at, and, what's your backup plan? If you need dialysis, how would you know? And making sure he has really clear conversations with his doctors, but even his physicians are not entirely supportive, even though he feels amazing. No swelling, no uremia,
amazing.
He's following his regular life. They're uncomfortable with what the numbers are, and they don't know what to do, right? You have to treat the person, not the numbers.
Exactly.
So, anyway, so one thing. Anything you want to add to that before I talk about what it's like to move through a transplant process?
No, I think that's all been covered really well.
I'm going to share my screen because I'm a visual person and I love talking through visuals.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so let's say you've decided you're going to move into the process of getting a transplant. And I will be really honest, any of my patients with the GFR less than 20, I strongly encourage them to start walking through the transplant process, at least to keep it in your back pocket. Because I tell them, you can always turn a kidney down, and somebody somewhere will thank you if you turn a kidney down. But if you need a kidney, you cannot just get on the list and hope it's going to be there.
No.
So just walk through the process. It's not a short process. It's not a one single appointment. It is multiple appointments. It can be, a good, 3 to 6 months, depending on what happens in your testing. So let's just talk about it. So you decide, okay, I may need a transplant in the future. What are you going to do? You would get some recommendations on some transplant centers, lots of good tools. You do some research online, and you would set up an appointment with the transplant center. The coordinator from the center would do a follow-up call with you and just kind of see where you're at, get a recommendation from your doctor. You'd meet with your transplant team, and they would give you a good purview of all the testing that's needed. And there's a lot of testing, right? Transplants, getting a kidney. There's way more people that need a kidney. And I don't know what the statistics are here, but it's a lot. I should have looked this up ahead of time. A lot of people want a kidney and not a lot of kidneys available.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you meet with the team because then they can talk through, are you going to find your own donor? Are you going to be put on a donor list? Are you going to do a swap program? Are you going, like, what is the situation where you're going to get a kidney? And just to clarify, the swap program is if you have your own donor, right? Maybe it's your brother, your sister, your aunt, your neighbor, whatever, and they donate a kidney. Now you have to match your blood types to for the kidney to actually stay in your body and work. And sometimes that person who's willing to donate is not going to match to you. Very common. They won't match. And in that case, you go into what's called a swap program. So maybe that kidney won't match you, the one you're willing to have donated or have someone to donate, but somebody else has a donor and they're willing to donate, and you would, swap. So it's really cool how that's been set up. Okay, go through all the testing. This can take a good chunk of time. And if you're super fit, super healthy, get through all the testing, everything looks good and you're on your way. Every once in a while in transplant testing, they will find something. They'll find an artery that needs to be, fixed up. They'll find something. I think this testing is so extensive that a lot of times I think it's really helpful because it's so thorough at finding any problems. But you do any testing, any medical, anything else you need to do to take care of and make sure you're ready for transplant. Then you would have a transplant team listing meeting. And the whole transplant team is there, right? And they're going to talk about if you're a good candidate for transplant. And either what happens is you get listed, right? So you're on the transplant list. When a kidney comes available and you're next in line, you get it. You get deferred, which means you can be on the list, but not yet, or you have to take care of this thing before you get on the list. Or you can be denied, where they'd say, you're not a candidate. So if you recently had cancer, you're probably not going to be a candidate for a kidney transplant, especially if it's still active, or if you had something else really aggressive that was active, they would deny you. And this denial piece, a lot of times they would inform you way, way, way up here when you meet with your team, because they know which people are going to be candidates or not. Sometimes they'll say, hey, like, you had cancer, you need to wait 3 years and then you can get on the list. So things like that. If you're listed, then you'll need to do annual labs, testing and evaluation, because you're not going to get your kidney as soon as you're listed. When they find a matching kidney to you, then you'll get a call and you will come as soon as possible and get a transplant. And it can be in multiple. I have a lot of patients that are listed at 3 different centers, just to increase their chances of getting a transplant. And that's how it works in the States. I'm not sure how it works in other countries, but for us, that's how the transplant process works.
Ours is very similar. I'm not sure whether you can be listed in multiple places. I think we have a central registry, but I could be wrong about that. I think the registry is central and the kidney just goes to wherever it's needed, is my understanding, but otherwise the rest is very similar.
Yeah, well, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's the journey of a transplant. Any other thing you want to add there, or do you want to talk about maybe what you would prep health-wise before and after?
I think the big thing is obviously, like you mentioned, preserving kidney function for as long as possible, because often you don't know how long you're going to be on the transplant list for. You're obviously waiting for a match and a donor, and sometimes they come quickly, and sometimes, I've had patients, waiting a long time, and especially if their kidney function has been declining and things like that. So again, the keto analogs, really good diet, all of those sort of things, all the stuff that we do during the program, the stuff that you mentioned is what we're doing as well to preserve kidney function as much as possible. Again, like you, a lot of people want to skip dialysis. it's not something in Australia that gets mentioned as much. I think most people think it's a natural progression or that they have to go on dialysis. It's generally our team that might be saying, well, you don't have to. I think people don't realize that that might be an option. Excuse me, especially if their labs are good and they're feeling good and you're managing to hold them. Again, very similar to the States, people get scared into dialysis because that's how the nephrologist and the physician knows to manage the kidney function and all those sort of things, versus maybe we're doing a good job with it. The labs, sure, your EGFR might be low, but again, there's no protein in the urine, your bum's not too, like you're not really showing any major sort of symptoms, and thus, therefore, you can sit where you are. But that can be quite a hard conversation for us to get patients around because they've been told they have to. And again, a lot of people don't want to upset their nephrologist team because they want to get the transplant, so they're doing what they're told. So that's probably the biggest thing I come up against in people that are going through that dialysis journey, is people not wanting to put a foot wrong because they don't want to say, well, I said no to dialysis, therefore I don't get my transplant, which is not quite how it works. So that's probably the only thing I wanted to add in there, that you won't be denied a transplant if you're holding in all of those sort of things, but a lot of people believe they will be. So that's probably the only exception.
No, I think it's a really, really important piece, because if you think about it from the physician standpoint, they do not want to be liable for an adverse outcome, right? Hospitalizations are so big on a metric level in the business side of healthcare. So they don't want somebody to be hospitalized. And sometimes when you see those numbers, right, my patient whose GFR is 6 right now, and I really have to give this guy huge kudos, because he is set up no matter what happens. He has researched all the dialysis centers. He knows what dialysis center he would get. He is prepared with an access. If he needed dialysis, he would know what he would do, and etc. But he doesn't have any symptoms. And so he's like, do I really, what's going to happen if I don't get dialysis? And with my GFR so low, and I was like, well, if you do get dialysis, what will happen, right? What will happen on the other side? Are you going to actually feel better? Are you going to have a better outcome? And that was a conversation we had. If you get dialysis before you get a transplant, you're going to have a better outcome. Yeah. And not necessarily. Even the experts will say, if you do dialysis, you don't have to have it. You're not necessarily guaranteed a better outcome with your transplant. Now, on occasion, right before you get a transplant, they'll have you do 1 or 2 dialysis sessions for whatever reason. But I reached out to a couple experts that I know in the conservative management. So people that trying to minimize dialysis unless absolutely necessary. And they say, no, if somebody feels good, treat the person, right? Keep them on that trajectory to go straight to transplant. So dialysis is an amazing therapy, and it keeps so many people alive. But it is still a tough therapy, right? It's hard on the body to go through dialysis. It is. And so if you can, again, it's individual for every situation. It's not medical advice. You would definitely have a conversation with your doctor, but it's not unreasonable to set an expectation for yourself that if you feel good, you've really got your nutrition tightened down, because that's the therapy at these late stages. It really is. That's the therapy. There's a couple other little things you can do, but it's primarily nutrition. Yeah. You have your nutrition tightened down. There's no reason, if you feel great, you can't, maintain your lifestyle till you get that transplant. Yeah, 100%. With good monitoring, frequent monitoring. Absolutely. And I think, like you say, that your patient you talked about, who's very empowered and knows all these dialysis centers, it really is, people have to feel like that and really in control for them to be able to say, I'm going to pass on dialysis. Because most of my patients, they're scared, right? They're fearful. Yeah. All of those. And there's a lot of unknowns, right? The doctors aren't sure. So they feel worried, right? It's you just need to do this because they feel safest if you've started dialysis. And it takes a little bit of a gut check, right? For yourself, and to think about it carefully, and to also get, more than one opinion sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, what do you feel comfortable with? I think that's really important to pay attention to our intuition.
Yeah. Yeah. No, good point.
Okay, so nutrition leading into dialysis, and then let's talk about nutrition or not into transplant, and then what you would do after. So nutrition before transplant, if you're trying to prolong kidney function, primarily we're using a low protein or very low protein diet with keto analogs.
Yep.
But when I say that, because when you state the title of it, it looks like the focus is on protein.
Yes.
And yes, you have to modify protein because it's just a real heavy hitter. And when you don't have a lot of function, you need to be mindful of it. But that is not the only thing that will prolong your kidney function at a later stage. You really want to be mindful of the other things. And this is where I see tons of people missing the boat and ending up malnourished. And they'll come in, they're super malnourished when we talk with them. I mean, they're not like looking like their face, well, sometimes, but usually it's not like their face is all sunken in, their collarbones are sticking out, not malnourished like that, but they have nutrient deficiencies and I can see it, right? They're tired, not feeling well, they can't do their daily activities. But beyond just cutting down your protein, you have to know how you're going to bump up the rest of your nutrition. It's not just about cutting protein. Huge misnomer is that if we get the protein low, we're like on the right track. Not true. What is true is that if you're going to decrease a nutrient, a big nutrient like protein, you have to understand what else you're going to increase, which for us is generally fat. Yes, right? It's good, healthy fats. We have to increase fat because most carbs, unless we're doing tons of sugar, which we don't want to do, unless you're doing tons of sugar, carbs are attached to proteins. We usually do like a little bit of a higher healthy fat diet. Totally fine, even if you have cardiac disease. But we'll do a little bit of a higher healthy fat diet. And then we really hone in on getting enough nutrients, right? Anemia is a massive problem at late stage. And you go into your transplant and you're super anemic, guess what? You're probably going to delay your transplant a little bit. You can't go in super anemic.
No.
So you want to have your anemia managed. You want to have good mineral stores on board. I think if you know your transplants like that week, I mean, any surgery, right? You're going to prep with some pre-nutrients, making sure you have enough amino acids on board, using a keto analog and other nutrients that can facilitate that healing process. For some of our folks that are going in with some autoimmune conditions, or they know transplants coming, we really try and work on what we can do to support the immune system naturally before they get a transplant. Because there are some supplements that are helpful with that. But after you get a transplant, your supplement options start becoming a little bit more limited. So it's like, what are we going to do to clean up the gut, support the gut? What are we going to do to just help your immune system so that you don't have an additional immune load when you get immunosuppressive medications for your transplant? So a couple of things to note beforehand. After transplant, and I'll share this with you, there are a couple of things you have to be careful of. Okay, is this sharing foods to avoid?
Yeah.
Okay, this is like the bare minimum. The bare minimum, you must know this. And there are patients, or we taught this course to dietitians, like, what do you do transplant? And we had a dietitian that wrote back to us and she's like, no one could figure out why this patient's transplant was failing. They thought they were totally non-compliant with their meds. She said, but we figured out why. And it was coming back down to these foods, actually. It was something they were eating.
Yeah, right.
So if you have a transplant, these are some things that you must be careful of, especially in the first year, right? A new transplant, you are especially careful. Your immune system is a little bit fluid and it's not super strong yet because the anti-rejection meds, so your body doesn't think that kidney's a foreign and throw it out. They work in a lot of places in our body. So you need to be really wise about what you're doing. So if you are on a transplant medication, you will be eliminating, as long as you're on that transplant medication, grapefruit, pomelo, red wine, and purple grape juice.
Yep.
These ones are going to interact with those medications. It is not worth the chance, not even on New Year's Eve.
Nope.
So that's one thing, interacting with medications. Then you have food safety. These are all things that pose a little bit of a higher bacteria risk. And if your immune system is suppressed, right, you're taking an anti-rejection medication, you're not going to mess around with foods that might have some sort of a foodborne illness attached to them, because it will hit you really hard. And these are serious, like E. coli, Listeria, botulism, Salmonella. Like, these are things that people get really sick, end up in the hospital. Some people can die from them, right? So you are careful about undercooked or raw meats, right? Unpasteurized foods like raw milk products. Salad bars where you have these cold buffets and food, they're supposed to follow certain guidelines, but really, if you look at the research, they really are not super safe. Nope. So you go to an all you can eat. They got this big salad bar. Like, I'm going to load up on all this healthy greens. Actually, some of that stuff sits there for a long time. It's not safe, not washed. People put their hands in it. Ugh, not good. Runny eggs, raw seafood. So sushi, right? If you love sushi going out, this is not going to be your thing post-transplant. Honey, botulism. We think about this with babies, but also because their immune systems are not super strong yet, also very relevant for post-transplant. And then these microgreens or sprouts, right? You think, oh, those are super healthy, but they carry a little bit of foodborne illness risk. So that's another one you're going to be careful of. Then here's the other thing that varies, right? And this varies by center. Different transplant centers have different recommendations. So I just usually tell my patients, here's the story behind it. You're going to have a conversation with your transplant center and ultimately like decide what's going to be right for you, right? And if you're really fragile, your immune system's really fragile, some of these I would probably restrict. I would just err on the side of caution, but some you might be a little bit stronger. But again, these vary by center. So am I saying these good or bad? I'm going to say defer to your center because everyone has an opinion. And I think they are really is to know thyself and where your immune system's at, right? And have that conversation. So, soft cheeses, right, that are made from raw milk. If they're unpasteurized, these are ones that you might want to be careful of. So if you had a brie that hasn't been pasteurized, that's a soft cheese that can carry some foodborne illness. Hot buffets, right? You go to the Chinese buffet, they've got their egg rolls that have been sitting out since noon and out 6 o'clock. They should have been kept hot, but who knows how long they dipped below the danger zone, if they were the top of the pile, bottom of the pile, who knows? Lunch meat can be a problem as well. Some people, if they're going to use lunch meat, they'll actually just heat it in a pan or they'll microwave it for 30 seconds. So it just can get really hot and kill some of those pathogens. Shellfish, some restrict, some don't. Whole cuts of meat, like a steak, right? Is that okay or not? Something to think about. And then ground meat. Again, this depends on the center, but if I was going to have a hamburger, I had a transplant, I would cook it well done. Yes. Not crispy, hard jerky on the outside, but it would be cooked all the way through. And herbal supplements, I know you and I talked about this, Fiona, but this is a whole other podcast in and of itself to talk through herbal supplements, because this is a really, really huge conversation. One that you just put right at the top of your head, that would be St. John's wort. Yes. I think just across the board. There's some herbal recommendations I'm not totally on board with at some transplant centers, but we'll talk about that in future podcasts. No, I agree with that for sure. Anything else you guys see on your side? I mean, those are the core recommendations. They're the core. I always think pregnancy sort of foods. It's the same sort of thing. That's good thought. So it's like if you wouldn't eat it if you're pregnant, same sort of thing. And then anything that you're going to get exposed to, remembering that people can take up to 50 tablets a day or more post-transplant. It can be, I
think people don't realize just how much medication they're going to take. And of course, it's going to be tapered as you go along, and it does taper quite quickly. But, you can expect 3 to 4 months post, you're on about 35 to 50 tablets. It's a lot. And, people can just feel like they're eating handfuls of sort of tablets. Like you said, you've got a very suppressed immune system. We want to make sure that your body doesn't reject that kidney, and we want to look after that. So the last thing we want to do is be putting in any foods that are on a very suppressed immune system that are going to give you other issues that can then obviously compromise or put at risk your kidney transplant. So no, exactly the same sort of thing here.
Yeah. And, coming out of a transplant, thinking ahead, and this is where I think it's great to work with a professional, work with a dietitian to have this planned out so you are ready to be nourished, right? Mm-hmm. So you get a transplant and you come out, you have a few days in the hospital, and then you go home and you don't want to be eating cream of wheat all week, right?
No.
Or I don't know, Cheerios. You really want to have some nourishing food. So working with a professional on some ideas, maybe you have meals prepped ahead of time. If you do like a meal in the United States, we have meal train, right? People can sign up, get you meals, or maybe your church is providing meals. Having some real clear guidelines on what people can provide for you. Mm-hmm. And also, if people are sending in your meals, that is it's such a blessing to be nourished and, fed by people in your community. But also you want to be mindful, not everyone has great food safety.
No, very
and
good point.
If you're going to have people bring you food, it's really proactive ahead of time to send out like, hey, if you send food, here are some things that are really important. Please don't leave it on your counter all day and then send it over to us in a casserole dish.
And yes, no, keep going.
Real strict guidelines, because that, again, all that love, your kidney is just not worth it for that one casserole. No. Or setting up meal delivery, right? Whatever it is, HelloFresh, Blue Apron, Purple Carrot. I don't know what you guys have there. Those are popular ones here. But if you have some of those meal deliveries set up for yourself, they can be, depending on how big your family is, $50 to $100 a week. But for a few weeks to have your meals delivered and you can cook them and care about their food safety, and you're getting good nutrients, right? It's not just protein that heals you. We always think protein heals us. Yeah. It's super important. But it's all the other nutrients too that can really support you in a healing process.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And back to your point, to reiterate it, it's the pre-planning. Because when you've come out and you've had your transplant, you're not going to be in the state of mind or have the energy as you're recovering to really be on top of that sort of stuff. So the more pre-prep you can do and letting people know, and like you mentioned, I think that's a really important tool, especially for the first, depending on how you were going in and what you were having it done for and all of those sort of things, for the first 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, you really are in recovery mode and not doing a lot. Some people bounce straight back, and, your Kelly that works with you, she bounced really very quickly, but she did all of this, right? She was very well prepared and all of those sort of things. So I think doing it before you go in as part of your transplant aftercare plan, having that done beforehand is really, really important, rather than having to think about it when you're coming out.
Yeah, because even the first few weeks or so, getting adjusted to the medications and just having a surgery and all of that, you're not going to feel super strong. I think the pregnancy is and birth of a child is actually a really good analogy, because, for a woman, she has a baby. Does she need to spend the next 2 to 3 to 4 to 6 weeks preparing meals so she can stay super well nourished on top of everything else? No, most people want to be prepared ahead of time, so when they have the baby, they can focus on the baby and focus on healing themselves. Yeah. Same with the transplant, right? You really want to just be able to take care of yourself for those few weeks. Doesn't mean you're going to be bedridden and can't go out, but you're just going to be really cautious and take care of yourself. Get some sunshine, when you're cleared, get out and, do some walking and, and have good nourishing food.
Yeah. And I think it's important that people know that when you are post-transplant, you can put your protein intake back up. You don't have to be on that big
Yep.
because I think it goes back up to about, I think it's and same on dialysis, right? Your protein can go up
1.2.
1 to 1.2. And so you want to bump your protein back up because, as you mentioned, it is part of the nutrients that heal, as are healthy fats. They're anti-inflammatory. They're going to help post, as are other things. It's not just protein, but like you don't have to do that protein restriction. In fact, you don't need to, because you want that kidney to start functioning properly, and you want all of that protein in to help heal. So that's another important.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up. This is a big question, right? If people that have been vegan for their kidneys are like, can I have meat after my transplant? It'll be a big question, right? Now, can I add some animal protein back in? I'm so excited to have cheese or chicken or whatever.
Yeah.
And we always say, well, first off, some people, they go vegan and that is their, like, they feel so good. They just stay there, right?
Yeah.
But other people, they're really looking forward to, they even crave some of those animal proteins. And in that case, I honestly think for a lot of them, it's so good to add them back in. It's really nutrient dense. It's very mineral dense.
Yes.
Can be just such a great addition to their diet. I
totally agree. Yeah, they're all the big points. What else do we need to cover in post-care? So we've got all the medications, pill boxes are a great idea. Just anything you can do to make it simple for you. And then any herbals or anything that you're doing pre-care, you need to double check everything, because you are going to be on so much medication. Like, I think people underestimate how much medication. There's a lot,
it's a lot. Yeah.
The first time I saw a poster, I was like, it was like 50 times. It is a lot of tablets. Yeah. The anti-rejection meds. Yeah, it really is just mind-boggling. And of course it does taper down, but I think I found a lot of my patients aren't told that. It's really once they've had the transplant and then they're getting their post-care written up, and they're just like, how much do I have to take? Like, people really are blown away. So if it's one thing I want to let people know, is you're going to be taking a lot of pills. They're going to feel like a meal. Like, there's so many.
Yes, it is. It's so huge. And there is no exception. You must stick with the regimen. We both work in like a natural holistic space, right? And so sometimes I'm like, medication, but right, like sometimes. But when it comes to transplant, there is not an exception. There is not a vacation. It is worth it, even though it's so many pills. It is worth it to follow that regimen to keep that kidney. And most people feel, I'd say probably more than 95% feel so much better after they get a transplant where they've had this low kidney function. They notice a difference, and it is worth it to keep that transplant strong. And you can keep a transplant for a long time, like 20, 25, 30 years. If you will take care of it and take care of yourself, they can last a really long time. But it is so sad to me when I hear of someone, I went on vacation, I forgot my medications. Like, it is not worth it. So that just has to be a priority in your life, is to get those anti-rejection meds.
Yeah, even the
taken care of.
Yeah, I'm agreeing there.
And that is both a logistical daily life and a financial commitment for a lot of people, is they have to plan financially to make that work and think ahead if something changes in their insurance or whatever, that they can find the right access to get those meds, because it makes a huge, huge difference. Yeah,
we're lucky in Australia that stuff's all subsidized, or at least made a lot cheaper. But there's no shortcuts. That immune system, your immune system's amazing, and it's going to, if you're not taking the suppression, the immune systems are going to be like, kidney out, and you don't want that to happen. So I will say, I'm going to just add one other little thing here, one little caveat. If you've gone through this transplant, and especially for people with autoimmune conditions, right? You've been on a restricted diet, you go through the transplant, you liberalize your diet. People say, you can eat this, you can eat that, whatever. I've had a couple people that they totally liberalize their diet after transplant, and they don't feel good. No, you're right. And it's the autoimmune ones that are going to notice it the most.
Exactly. They added a bunch of foods that before they weren't including very much of, and the transplant feels like the cure-all, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had this big thing changed, and they don't feel good, right? I've had people that were following maybe a lower carbohydrate approach, and when they get their transplant, they added, a bunch of simple sugars and carbs, and they're like, oh, I just felt awful. And they said it was totally fine. And maybe it's okay, generally speaking, for a transplant, but remember, you are not just a kidney, you're a whole body. And so some things that worked for you before, if you're autoimmune, you're probably gluten-free is a really important, great place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you get a kidney does not mean your autoimmune condition is resolved, especially with kidney disease autoimmunity, right? Polycystic kidney is a genetic disease. When you get a transplant, you are not going to regrow your cysts.
No.
But with an autoimmune disease, that autoimmune condition is still present in your body, and you still want to take care of yourself on a, gluten-free or dairy-free, if that really works for you. You don't liberalize everything.
No, 100%. That is, I'm thinking of a patient with lupus and she had to have 2, and it was, I got her on the second one, and that's exactly what happened. She liberalized her diet, and forgetting that the driver of the lupus, yes, she had, nephritis and things like that, but she still had all the other stuff going on. And just because she got a new kidney doesn't mean you could go back and have gluten and dairy and all those sort of things, because the driver of the autoimmune disease wasn't taken away by replacing the kidney. So, and that kidney just didn't, I think it lasted a year and a half before she needed another one. And so the second she took good care of, she learned a lesson. But it's really, really important to remember the driver. And if you're diabetic or high blood pressure, you still need to look after all of that stuff, because the driver behind why the kidney went out in the first place still needs management behind it.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. What else, Jess? What else do we need to say in this transplant journey?
Well, there's hours we could talk, but I think we have 2 other planned to talk about the herbals, because I think that's a really important conversation on herbals and supplements after transplant. This is a place where there's massive amounts of misinformation and some important decisions you got to make. And then also weight loss leading into transplant is another area that I think we want to touch on. But I think for now, these are some good core basics. Of course, if you have questions, it's great to drop them in the comments, and then we know what else we need to talk about on this topic. But definitely, I think if I were to give a couple core takeaways, if you have low kidney function and you're moving towards transplant, pursue nutrition and lifestyle therapies to prolong your function so you can skip the dialysis chair if it's safe. Every good clinician will tell you, like, hey, it's time to start dialysis because it's not safe to not. And, that's true. But a lot of people can avoid dialysis. They're proactive with their nutrition and lifestyle. Yeah. And then on the other side, I'd say the core takeaway is really take everyone that I've ever talked to really has done this, which is so cool, but really take your medications there seriously and really take care of yourself too, because you take care of yourself, you're going to take care of that amazing kidney that you have been gifted. So
yeah, same points. And like you said before, we're going to do 2 more podcasts on transplant. So if there's anything that we haven't covered or that you want us to talk about, make sure you put it in the comments below. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. That way you'll get notified when we put the new ones up. And if you want to work with someone, and I am a big believer with transplant and really getting that right, especially coming into it. If you don't want to do dialysis, you really need to work with someone so you don't get protein deficient if you're going to do it via a low protein diet, and getting on the right keto analogs and making sure that's right. I'll put in Jess's team's detail below, but it's kidneynutritionalinstitute.org. They'll be able to work with anyone right around the world. Kidney Coach team can do the same. Highly recommend you don't do that one alone. Do that, work with someone properly that can really keep an eye on that. You've got someone to bounce, whether you can avoid dialysis or not. You've just got that extra backup to your intuition, which I think is super important. Jess, thank you as always for your expertise and knowledge on this topic. I think it's a really great one. And we will see you next time when we go into part 2 of dialysis, and we will talk more about the weight loss, and we'll go through the herbal interactions and medications and what is and isn't true from the research that we've all gone through. Thanks again for being part of our community. And Jess, again, thank you for everything. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.